Hello, and welcome to Artpop Talk. I'm Bianca.
And I'm Gianna. It feels like it's been a minute since we had a good APT sesh, but we are back and brought you a very special guest for today's episode.
Joining us today is Maria Kruglyak, an art researcher and editor at one of our very favorite arts journals, Culturala.
Maria talks with us all about her Arts and Theory journal, in which she is one of the contributing editors, called Culturala, in which Artpop Talk is actually a contributing writer. We've known Maria for quite some time, and we are so happy that the Artpop Tarts are finally getting to meet her. With that being said, let's Artpop Talk.
I missed our theme music. It's been a while since I've heard it.
I know. I missed our theme music as well. You know what I mean? It like starts my day, gets me. It's like my
the
theme
people
song.
going.
Gets the people going. You know, it's like Gianna's theme song. So,
Oh yeah, your own hype music.
My own hype music. And I have really missed Chitty Chatty. That is one thing that
truly
I do really miss about not having weekly episodes. Is that I feel like I have to wait a long time to share my random thoughts with everybody.
I feel like I've not seen you in forever. I was just in Oklahoma, and it feels like a month ago now.
Yeah, that does feel like a long time ago. Yeah. Bianca came to Oklahoma for my birthday, which was super nice, with also fashion expert of APT, Juliana Poro, and also friends of APT, Audrey Kaminsky. So, you know, we had a great time. I may have bought a wedding dress. So that was super exciting. I sure did. Yeah, I did. So, you know, good times in Oklahoma.
Good times in Oklahoma. I have my Oklahoma Fairgrounds cup. We went to the fair, and I am obsessed with the souvenir cup. It holds like a liter of water, so it's honestly been great because I'm just chugging water all day long now out of this State Fair souvenir cup.
Bianca, I just need to say it is a travesty that no one will see the video footage of the way that you just displayed this cup, because it made me feel like I am like watching your YouTube channel and you're like reviewing the quality of this cup. And there was something really satisfying about it. Like I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. Holds 1 liter of water. Doesn't stay cold very long because it's plastic.
Well, I just thought like you have these like long like acrylic nails on right now. I just feel like you like Vanna White like the shit out of this Oklahoma travel cup. Like it was great.
Thank you. It did make an appearance on a work call the other day, and my boss, I told my boss about this cup, and she was like, "Is that your fair cup?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, dude! This cup is fucking awesome."
So, well, love that. I guess with that being said, hi everyone. Welcome back to our channel. It's been a hot minute, and Bianca has some chitty chatty notes in our document that say, "Don't worry, darling, ? Blonde ?
I mean,
what absolute shit content those were.
This is actually a review of the terrible content. I feel like, Jenna, there's also so much art news going on. I think in November, we haven't done art news in so long. Maybe we throw together a November art news because there's a lot of things I want to talk about. But at the same time, I also can't stop thinking about the Met Gala theme. Like, can we unpack that? Because I'm hated over here.
I'm hated. I think that's a really good idea. I think perhaps when we come back in November, a art news, we've done a mega art news episode before, and it might be time to bring that back again. Although I did get a request to do an episode on nuns and, you know, with the spooky season upon us. So
I also had a great idea for a spooky season episode, which we might just have to catch up on later. But I was in Salem this past weekend, and I was in a shop and was reading all about the tarot cards there. And it's my understanding that there's a specific set of like the original tarot cards that I believe, unless I'm interpreting the name wrong, were illustrated by a woman. And I just found that really interesting. And also, of course, like all the witchy shit and, Salem witch trials were super fascinating. But
That
I
is
was intrigued
fascinating.
by the idea of illustrations with tarot cards and magic.
Another little like spooky season conspiracy theory that I just came across because we know I love a good, particularly celebrity conspiracy theory, is that Post Malone is haunted. He's like cursed or something.
Oh,
I know. Apparently he like went to this like extremely haunted place and then touched this like object that he wasn't supposed to touch, and now he's like cursed. And I don't know if you remember, but he was in one of his private jets crashed, and I think like everyone was fine on the plane, but it was after
hmm.
that, and then all these other things have happened to him. So new conspiracy theory is that Post Malone is cursed.
Does he think he's cursed?
I don't know, but Reddit
Or is
seems
this
to
just
think he
like
is.
some like random man on the internet was like, he's cursed. She's a
Ran-
witch. She's a witch.
Random man on the internet for sure, just yelling into the void. Yep.
Uh, if I learned anything from the Salem Witch Museum, it's that anyone can just throw shit at anyone and people will believe it. And
Well,
that is a concept that has stood the test of time. And I
case
fall
in point,
victim to that.
I am a riding this Post Malone is curse train all the way to Sad Girl Central Station, like
That is so funny.
all the way. Um, I
I
mean,
mean,
we did have some kind of good content. Bianca, did you watch the Hocus Pocus 2 movie?
I did. That is excellent content for spooky season. I just watched it the other day and it was delightful as was expected, but it's one of those things where you're excited for it because it's this piece of content that is related to a nostalgic, pure, wholesome memory. It's like that scene from Friends that I sent you where I didn't know that this thing existed about a show that I know every word to. And then all of a sudden we have this new piece of content. But did I enjoy it the same amount that I enjoy the original piece of content? No. But I was happy to have it. I think I'll just forget that it exists, I guess. Like I don't want it necessarily as part of my connection to Hocus Pocus. Does that make sense?
Yes, I agree. It's clear like what audience this movie was made for, and I have a little bit of thoughts about like woke humor. Um
Yeah,
that
100%. Hundo P.
honestly I felt like kind of ruined it for me. Um
Yeah. I mean,
yeah, I did watch an interview with our three leading ladies of that movie, and they were talking about potential Hocus Pocus, 3 movies. And I was not surprised at all the way in which they talked about a third movie being produced and maybe how they see that going is that they described it as an animation. And I was not surprised at all. Because don't we like just see that trajectory so much? Like we take something that we love and then like we get a second reboot and it's okay, and then it turns into like some TV spin-off animated thing.
but that's interesting in that it's kind of the opposite effect of what Disney is doing in general with the animated to live action. I don't know how I feel about that. I guess I feel negatively about that, but I want to feel positively about that. It's just nothing can beat the original. I think at the end of the day, I'm just exhausted by reboots in general. And even though this technically is a sequel, it's a reboot. And I just I want there to be more original content. And honestly, Jenna, watching the movie, I don't want this to be a spoiler for anyone who hasn't watched Hocus Pocus 2 yet, but the way that I'm assuming it was the CBS interview in which you're referencing, Gianna,
Yeah.
because I also watched the same one.
Why am I not surprised?
And the way that they were talking about this kind of wholesome quality to the sequel, that's what made me like twinge a little bit, because of course the first one is wholesome, but there's this quality to the first one that's um against the grain for Disney in a way. I think Hocus Pocus is darker, and the way that they were talking about the original is, there are these witches that kill children, and that is uh, by itself, that's kind of a dark concept. And the way that the actresses were talking about the sequel, I got that fear of like, this is going to be too wholesome. And I am okay with new content that is dark and witchy but humorous and funny. It doesn't have to be a reboot, and it doesn't have to be pristine and all prettied up for me to enjoy it, I guess. And I think that's just a general problem with every single movie it feels like I'm watching these days. It's just like everything, the reboots are just a cleaned up version of something that is from a different time, and I don't think that formula works at the end of the day.
I completely agree. It's like trying to like rewrite maybe some of the dated humor or concepts that were happening,
But
and
what in
that's where
Hocus
the
Pocus is
woke.
really that date? I mean, that's the thing about Hocus Pocus, is it doesn't fall victim to that, I don't think.
So it's interesting that you say that, Bianca, because I found an old interview from when Hocus Pocus 1 came out in 1993 or around that
Mhm.
time, where Kathy Najimy was being asked about. Through the grapevine, they heard that she was not wanting to originally take the role as Mary. And she
Mhm.
talked about how she didn't want to play into, this idea about like how like women were perceived or play into this like mysticism of witches or witchcraft because,
Yeah.
historically, like women are just, blamed for everything. And she talked about how she literally had a conversation with Gloria Steinem about her thoughts
Well,
about taking this role, right?
stop.
And how Gloria Steinem was talking about how, really like witches were just doctors, they were just healthcare workers, they were most likely midwives, they were most likely performing abortions, and then, of
Mhm.
course,
Or
are being
children
right, or, of
who
course,
don't know
being
better.
vilified for their work as a healthcare provider.
Mhm.
And so, you're allowed to, as a woman identifying person, take your own history and kind of do with that what you will. You know what I mean? So,
Right.
and I think that's the thing about like Hocus Pocus is that like it is a cult classic in a way, but it doesn't feel dated. And I loved the
Mhm.
more of the costuming that happened in the first Hocus Pocus as well.
Agreed.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
I would have loved it to have kept the same vibe. And I guess I'm just feeling like everything is off these days in terms of what we're seeking for from entertainment or what we're seeking for in terms of like horror or kitsch culture too, because
Mhm.
I know that nobody is happy with this stupid blonde movie, but what I'm finding is I don't feel like people are describing it in the terms that it is a horror movie, and I feel like based on the concepts that I see at play, it definitely falls in line with what we see in horror films. And
Mm.
there are super traumatic and also like bloody and gory moments in that film as well. And the fact that it's not being described in those terms, and maybe it doesn't do horror justice to even put that movie in that
Yeah, I
genre
think
as well.
I think that's fair. I will not be watching Blonde, but I think it's fair to say that there is such an artistry to a horror film. And if you're looking for a spooky episode, one of my favorite APTs is talking about The Final Girl with Lynn Broyles. And
Bianca, I was just
I
gotta say, I've been dying to talk to Lynn about this movie
oh,
in a way because I
yes.
even though I hate the way that this movie obviously casts Marilyn in this artful lens to to traumatize this historical figure and also
Mhm.
create
I
different
mean, talk
fictitious
about ghosts.
narratives.
Like,
Yeah, she's
seriously.
being haunted and then is in the film is being spoken to by her unborn child in a super cringy, disturbing way that doesn't lend itself to the kind of artfulness in horror that actually has a better
Mhm.
purpose than what this film did.
Yeah, and this is I'm not sure how I find these two things related or if they are related at all, but there's something about that kind of additive element that I also found completely unnecessary. Two very different films, but with Hocus Pocus 2, I didn't need the backstory of the Sanderson sisters. Like, I don't need a reason to justify the fact that they are witches, or like they didn't have a choice, or like the sisterly bond is what keeps them together. Like, they're witches who eat children. Let them be witches who eat children. It's fantastic. And there's
Mhm.
still that kitsch and that humor, but I don't need a reason to love them. And I don't think the movie needed to give the audience a reason that they love each other either. I just don't find that necessary at all.
We never
And with
needed
Marilyn, I don't think I mean, I haven't seen the movie, but I don't think any of that is necessary. I don't think Don't Worry Darling was necessary. There's just is that making
yeah.
sense?
Yeah, it is. And I think there's something to be said for one of the things that everyone keeps speaking about in light of this reboot of Hocus Pocus is some of the culture that has came and and speaking of fandom, speaking of drag. And we never needed this backstory on the Sanderson sisters to know why we're obsessed with them. We're obsessed with them because we love their personalities and they're fabulous. And that lends itself to a contemporary culture, a queer culture. And we don't need to humanize something that we already love. It's okay to just know that we like it, because we like it. Like, I think if there was ever, for example, like a Rocky Horror Picture 2 on the table, I would shut that shit down. Like,
Oh, no, but I mean, they did do that stage live version with Laverne
Laverne
Cox.
Cox,
I
which
will
I
say
never
though,
watched
Gianna,
actually.
I think, yeah, I didn't watch it either. I think that element in Hocus Pocus 2 with the drag queens was honestly, it may have been one of the best parts of the movie, because first of all, like Cornbread, oh my god, and making a Hocus Pocus appearance. um I think it was so pure, and that is exactly what they should have been focusing on the whole time. Is there was no explanation of why all those drag queens were on stage. The witches just showed up, and it was an element that we as the viewer recognize, because we know that the characters from Hocus Pocus have played a part in contemporary culture in different communities. And it was so fascinating the way that they just let it be. They just all of a sudden were on stage with all of these, what we know as drag queens, that are these people that are dressed up as them. And they didn't provide, they weren't like, why are you here? Like, oh, we're icons. Why are we icons? There was this element where it was just there because it was there. And I
Right.
think that scene played out actually very well. But
Right.
when you're trying to give that
Contradictory to the rest of kind
to
of the
the,
narrative that they created with the rest
yes,
of the movie. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. Astute observation, Bianca.
Thank you. Thank you. We have someone on today who is just full of astute observations. And as we were wrapping up our conversation with Maria, we were just fangirling over her. And APT's crush is Culturala and has been for a very long time. So we are very, very honored and excited for you all to hear this conversation we have today.
Um, Big mega crush over here for this platform, this journal, and our special guests for the day. So, Maria is a writer, researcher, and spends most of her time as an editor of Culturala, a network based art theory journal that she's been running with a team of 6 and a whole lot of different artists and writers. Wearing many hats, she works as a writer and editor for independent art publications and publishing houses since doing her MA in the History of Arts at SOAS University of London. She spent the past 9 months working with environmental art in a paid internship at MAAT, Museum of Art, Architecture, and Technology in Lisbon. All right, everyone, you know the drill. We are going to take a short break and we will be right back with Maria Kruglyak.
We are here with the fabulous Maria. This has been such a long time coming, a dream come true to finally have you on the podcast. So, with that being said, can you please introduce yourself to the listeners and share a little bit about, your relationship with art and what brings you on today?
Yes, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. It's really been a long time coming. I feel like we guys have been speaking for over a year now.
Yeah.
And hi to all the fabulous Artpop tots. I've been hearing about you so much. And Maria, if you follow Artpop, you probably know me as editor of Culturala because we're really lucky to be working with Artpop Talk a lot. Both you guys are actually contributing writers, and we've been sharing a lot of things like across Instagrams and little bits like this. But otherwise, I'm an art researcher, I'm a writer, but specifically in art theory, which might sound a bit dull, but it's actually really fun. I did a master's in history of art, and otherwise, I basically work with writing essays, little pieces, a lot of editorial work, both kind of directly in the art and the other stuff you need to do to actually just make some money. And also, I run Culturala, which is an art theory journal that I founded together with a wonderful team of 5 people. And I mean, I first started off as an artist, but kind of like way back. It was a dream when I was a little girl. I always wanted to do something with that, and I started to paint. I did a couple of exhibitions, realized at some point while doing my history degree and focusing on art that I actually like to speak about other people's art much more than making my own art, and kind of shifted over into art theory. And I love art. It's something that I feel like it's always been a big part of my life, and almost not even so much a choice as something I kind of just fallen into.
Maria, I specifically want you to tell us a little bit more about the inception of Culturala. You bring a different perspective as a writer and as an arts theorist. So please talk about Culturala and this platform, but also if you can talk about that lens a little bit more for the listeners, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, art theory is about how you speak about art, specifically contemporary art. So I guess the difference is almost like, do we see this as something historical or something that's being created now? Sometimes that means, what does this art mean for our society, but also actually the language we use to speak about art. So something that I specialize a lot in otherwise is specifically, how do we talk about art in a way that makes sense? And the inception of Culturala comes from that as well. So it first started as an idea when I was writing and doing also some exhibitions or trying to do some exhibitions, looking for spaces, and kind of realized that there wasn't a space where I could write in a way that didn't have the jargon. I mean, there's a lot of platforms now that are doing this in different ways, but it's also hard to speak theoretically without using that jargon. It's easier to say post-colonial, this is feminist, and this is like this, without actually saying, well, what do you feel when you see it, and what does that mean in this context? And that's kind of how Culturala started. So it was an idea about, let's make the art theory world a bit more accessible. Let's make the way we speak about art more accessible, but also let's try to experiment with this new language. Can we speak about art in a way that's direct and in a way that's welcoming? Or do we need to keep having these like mystical exhibitions where, you go in and you see things and then you wonder, what is this actually?
That's so interesting how you're conceptualizing the idea of an arts journal that feels very academic in nature. I remember when I was in grad school, I was doing this internship and I was supposed to give a tour on LGBTQ artists in the collection that I was working with. And as I was getting ready to present my, kind of mock up tour to my supervisor at the time, she was like, this is not understandable to like your everyday audience. And I was speaking like I had been writing for the past however many months. And it's such a eye-opening experience to realize that you've been ingrained to think about art in this way, so much so that you can't I couldn't even speak about it on this kind of everyday accessible level. So I love what you guys are doing so much, because you're bringing that to people in this kind of arts community who are already well established. And I'm sure a lot of people who your audience reaches are in that vein, that have kind of been built up within that community of the arts. And teaching them how to be accessible is a whole other part of art history and theory that's not really discussed. So, on that note, I suppose, can you talk about how you actually bring that idea to fruition? What is the editing process like whenever you're trying to talk about something that's really theoretical and conceptual and actually put that into print and disperse it for everyone?
Well, that's a good question because basically we're all experimenting with it. I almost want to say that in a way, Cultural is more, it's an attempt, it's a dream. We're trying to find ways, and that's why we're more network based. And everyone that we work with always brings in new ideas and new ways of doing this. For example, we have one of the artists coming to our upcoming issue on memory, who is also a playwright, and the plays that she writes are also on memory. So the way we're going to publish her piece is going to be with part of her writing, but also try to explain that somehow. We do a lot of conversations, and um, this is something that comes from bell hooks, right? Of the idea that you have a conversation rather than an interview. How can we speak about this? And maybe like fumble together towards something. But in terms of the editorial
That's a
process,
big talent here on Art Pop Talk, is fumbling our way through art conversations. I mean, you're speaking our language to a T here, Maria.
lovely. No, yeah, I think that everything that you always do is always has to be somehow, you just need to try to find this way forward. But in terms of the actual editorial process, is very long, primarily. And we've noticed this even with essays that, like, with me and Sarah, right, who's the other editor, that we actually have to edit our own work so much. Because in the end of the day, still use these complicated sentences. And we have a lot of artists coming in who are also writers who also use very long, complicated sentences because it's the only way we kind of learn how to write about it. And especially when people come straight from art school, I'm sure that both of you feel with this, that when you kind of transition into more like workplace art world, that there's a way of you actually have to shift and forget all of the stuff. Because if you will, it's like you were saying, like if you would speak the way that you're writing, but also even if you give an exhibition proposal in the way that you're writing essays, it just doesn't work.
Oh my gosh, this is where all the thoughts come into play. But yeah, I mean, I feel like the way that we describe Art Pop Talk is just a dumping ground for the free flowing thoughts that Bianca and I have. However, I feel like I come from this background, or like I walk these paths, right? From an art maker and also as an art writer and as a content creator. And Maria, it sounds like you have kind of come from that art making background as well and have kind of shifted. So it's always hard for me to identify as one or the other, but I haven't been trained to write from this art historical view. I didn't write a full art historical thesis. Therefore, I always have felt like I've been behind, right? I don't have the written jargon of an art historian, but what is so comforting about the platform like Culturala is that it really lends itself to a person like me that comes from this different background, not a formal background, but I feel like I can have these free flowing thoughts. And the other aspect is that we never also feel like from this trained background that we can write creatively when we are talking about history. But I feel like you so can. And that's what I really like about the journal is that creative writing aspect.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad you do. But it's so interesting because the way that you guys, I mean, you speak about art pop talk as a dumping ground, but what I'm always thinking about when I'm listening to you guys is how well you shift between the different topics, you know, like things that are light and things that are actually quite heavy and complicated, and that they can all work together, and you never actually fall back into using some kind of cliches or slogans or art jargon or whichever kind of way you're trying to put it.
Oh,
What you're telling us
that's
is that
so
you
nice.
listen to the podcast, so that just like
That's all we care
warms
about.
our heart. I think too, Maria, kind of following up on Bianca's initial question, part of our kind of pre-interview conversation is you had shared with us some of the kind of navigations of also not only the editorial process, but just putting on this whole production that you guys are creating. I mean, it is a production to create these digital journals and also these physical journals as well. So I know that you guys have been working towards how to navigate that with your other professional careers and this more kind of flexible approach. I know that you also have some questions for Bianca and I about how we kind of navigate that on the podcast, but there's differences in our production. So I guess we are so curious about the ways in which you're producing your content, and if you kind of want to share the you know the highs and the lows of that with the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, because in a way, maybe it's nice to start with kind of saying how Culturala is set up in general, because so basically we have both printed issues and digital issues. So the printed ones and the digital ones kind of come one after the other. So far, we have two coming up, one out, the printed one, the first one. In terms of the production, I guess the first part of it in general, this is about like, you know, finding people, speaking with people, inviting people, having open calls, and then moving that into actually an editorial process and putting things together in a way that really makes sense. That maybe is the part that takes the longest time, because this is where this whole accessibility question comes in. And it's also maybe the part that is emotionally or mentally most difficult, because it also, when you start speaking about things like accessibility, or even when you invite people to do something in a place like that, people are also there because they're more welcome. They're also more likely to say, "I'm really sorry, but I actually can't right now. I need a month because I've been working too much." And we've had a lot of situations with artists saying things like this. I had a really bad, or maybe I'm still having, mental health situation because of overwork and because of actually trying to, you know, have a full-time job, do this project, work in a team of 6 people. We're all in different places, and kind of navigating between when different people have the mental brain capacity and possibility of doing it. And then there's also a financial aspect. So we were lucky enough to crowdfund the first issue. We had so much incredible support from so many people, and that was really amazing. But it also, I guess, put some kind of pressure onto, okay, this actually needs to really work now. And then you sit down with it and you try to start figuring out ways, and you realize that, or we realize that some things actually need to change. So the way we're thinking that we can just, you know, produce one issue and then in 3 months we can do the next one. But financially, that doesn't work if you don't have like a personal buffer. And then the same when it comes to time, because, you know, someone who's designing the issue, or someone who's actually doing the illustrations, or, you know, everything happens to different people. And I think maybe right now we're also in this kind of worldwide time of big changes. And I think because things are fluctuating so much, everyone's also finding things harder, because we come from this, I guess, very non-corporate approach of, we're actually here to work together and try to make this welcoming and direct and real. It is also much easier almost to allow those things to happen, and to change how we're actually working based on the situations that we are facing, on the situations that our contributors are facing. The things that have been most consistent, and where you guys have been contributing as well, are the newsletters. And that has been a really great output, because we have these bi-weekly newsletters that are quite short, but that always feature new artists, writers from the community, and the very variable. And it's something that I think that a lot of people from the network have ended up meeting each other from, and actually reaching out and working together with people that they never met before. And I guess that's the point of all of it. But as you say, it's also the fact that it's when it's printed, there's such a long process of, like even choosing the cover, and the printing process is so complicated, that I wish I was a trained designer and actually really knew how exactly everything should be. But you work with a printing company that works in a specific way, and there's just so much to learn, I guess, with the printing and then the designing, or the design, and also all these other aspects, and kind of making them fall into place, and then thereafter also actually distributing this, because we're kind of more or less all over Europe, and a few places in the States, in Mexico, in Brazil. So I think that what you're kind of pointing to in terms of the different modes, that when you are recording, and like in terms of writing and doing something printed or digital, I think that a lot of those things have different challenges. And perhaps it's actually the challenges are almost lying in where you're most comfortable, or what have you worked with the longest. Because if you work with something for a long time, you kind of also understand a little bit more, how long things are actually going to take, what are your possibilities. And I think that's something that every one of us who's kind of in the beginning of their arts career, a few years in and so on, just about figuring out. But then I was working at a museum in the past 9 months, and I can see that there also people are super last minute, super stressed. Like it's actually kind of unsustainable across the arts in how quick production is actually meant to be. But what are your feelings, approaches to all of this?
This idea that you're talking about, not only that spans art as a concept, but art as a workplace. I think what you guys have been able to do, you're not just a network of creatives, like you are, but at the end of the day, you are this major production, and that fosters a certain type of work environment. And that's something that I admire you guys so much for, especially on the global scale that you're working at. Gianna and I are one time zone away, and sometimes it's like we cannot get on the same page. And it's incredibly hard whenever you are working a, quote unquote normal full-time 9 to 5 position. I mean, Gianna and I have made that decision to scale back our weekly episodes just because life, changes and pushes you in different directions. It allows us to not only be sustainable in the way that we kind of function every day, but mentally sustainable so that we can keep doing art pop talk and keep having those really important conversations that we love to do. But when you're doing that every week, you're not in the same place, you're communicating with so many different people everywhere. It's really challenging, and you guys have done an incredible job from our perspective at finding that balance.
How did you guys come about actually deciding, you know, from doing a weekly podcast? I'm not sure how long have you been doing it for? It's a few years now, no?
It's going
Yeah.
on 3 years, isn't it? Did I make
Yes.
that up?
We're about 2.5 years in.
That's wild.
And yeah, it was, I mean, during COVID, that I had this mentality where I was like, I want to be consistent. Consistency is so important to building up trust with your audience, and I don't want it to appear that we don't care, that we're lagging, that we're not working hard. It was all about perception for me, and not really taking into account how Gianna and I, especially Gianna during the past years, were actually feeling and navigating the world and life. But I was so concerned with, we're starting something new. This is a business. Like, we need to be hardworking business women. And Gianna has been so gracious with me as I've come to figure that out and see that through her eyes. And it took me a really long time to get there because I was afraid of letting everyone down. I think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
But I mean, I always joke about, being, the world's like people pleaser. And, that is something I'm definitely trying to work on.
But it was hard to let even a smidge of that go. I mean, it was a big decision for us to go from this very business heavy mindset. And it's been fantastic, but a really good, self-evaluation to realize we are still doing the things that we wanted to do at the very beginning of this. We just have 2 episodes less a month, and that saves us a lot of mental energy. It makes us more sustainable, less susceptible to burnout, but it also still provides really insightful conversations like we're having now with you. And we have more time to do research, and we have more time to, spend with our partners. And so it's a good thing to step back and really reevaluate, but it's definitely hard. It was hard for me to come to terms with that.
I
I
definitely
think
hear you in terms of actually kind of understanding that or accepting that, okay, maybe it's fine to, if someone will be disappointed, and maybe they won't actually, because I'm not sure how you guys found what the response to switching from the weekly to the bi-weekly podcast was in terms of your audience.
I
I mean,
literally
no
don't
complaints.
think anybody gave a shit, Maria. Like, and I think that's the funny thing is, we do put this pressure on ourselves. But I think when we do really evaluate the content that we are creating and the network of listeners and participants in the podcast that we have, I also think it's fair to say that we were overproducing content too. I'm not sure that, we have the bandwidth financially and mentally and just time-wise right now based off our, work schedules to withstand something like that. And the fact that we were doing that for almost 2 full years is pretty incredible. But it's okay to say that you have other goals. Like, I would like to spend time with my fiance. I would like to be healthier. I would like to not have to sacrifice going to the gym because I need to do this podcast because I told myself 2 years ago that I was going to do it. And I don't want to disappoint Gianna from 2 years ago.
But it's also like, we are feeling so much of that, but I think our audience has been along for that journey as well. I mean, I think we've learned to become a lot more open and honest about how we're feeling, less guarded, maybe not so much guarded when it comes to art conversations, because we've always been, a little spicy when it comes to our feelings on things. But there is something to say for the people who listen to the show and the Artpop Tarts, giving us that grace and that space as well. And I think that's what a network does. That's what a community does. And I think when you learn from each other and you're open to hearing how others navigate through spaces, there's no reason that anyone, they might be sad they're getting less content, but I mean, I hope some people are like a little sad about it, but it's good for the audience in the long run, because it's a more honest show, I suppose.
Yeah, and I
But
also think that there's something to say in terms of, we always, when we speak about, the artists and the writers that we kind of love, I feel like we're always talking about them as, spent all these 5 years working on this piece, and that all the space, like Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, and it's been such a big part of our culture. But kind of combined with where our culture is going now, where it's really high paced, and, you know social media, the need for like posting things all the time, controlling everything all the time, and also these kind of business ideas that we need to be consistent and we need to be thorough and it always has to be perfect. While the people we kind of maybe admire, we think that it's great that they're not. And we speak about Frida Kahlo, we speak about how much she spoke about how she's actually feeling, but we are not ready to give that space to ourselves. And maybe that's something that comes in when you're, I don't know, I've been thinking about this question of if you're the art worker or the artist, kind of the main artist of whatever, um, to what extent we see it as a job, to what extent we see it as a pleasure, and also this need to kind of, it always has to be fun. And but then for it to be fun and for like real research to happen, you need time. And in a way that's kind of contradictory to how we do a lot of things in the art world.
Which kind of what you're describing makes me think of this question that we wanted to talk about just in terms of slowing down, because like all conversations we have on the podcast about the arts culture and working culture, that also extends past that barrier into a lot of different workforces. But I think that sometimes I wonder if the arts slowed down, would that kind of demystification happen in terms of the hustle, in terms of the unhealthy art worker, the unstable art worker, the not financially stable art worker. And so, I think slowing down for a lot of different work cultures has kind of made different environments more transparent. And I think a lot of people are moving towards healthier work environments. And that, of course, goes for the arts. Um, but like you're just talking about, I mean, you were just working at a museum for 9 months, and it seems like, planning those exhibitions are still back to back to back. But it's just the what if, like, what if we slowed down? What if we had, 3-day weekends?
Yeah, and I also think it's an extra interesting question when it comes to the arts, where I feel that I guess us who work in the arts think that they're so, so important. And they are, for sure. But I also think that people who don't maybe see it as, well, your job is not as important. No one will die because this exhibition opens tomorrow. This is a little bit arbitrary. And the way we react to it is always with, because it's disrespectful when someone says that. Our feelings get hurt. But at the same time, the question is, to what extent does it matter? How do we do it? And if that slowing down is not giving up or, letting someone down, but more a way of together finding healthier patterns. So as you say, 4-day work weeks have actually always been seen as, in all research studies, kind of come up as more productive and definitely more creative, which, I mean, this is why we're in the arts in the end of the day. Maybe more to be creative than productive, but still.
This kind of like production or even overproduction of like cultural content too. Sometimes I just think if the general public, if we did slow down, I feel like the general public would notice that shift. And then, I'm just curious about what would happen almost just from like a social studies perspective. Because so much our cities, our metropolitan areas and outlying areas all rely on these like cultural hubs. And I think we take that for granted. And so, what would happen if we did slow down? Is that like fighting fire with fire? Would we then get the respect that we deserve? I don't know.
I'm curious how everyone at Culturala navigates that. I mean, because I would absolutely consider you a place of work. It is a type of production for professionals. So, how do you go about those conversations whenever you're thinking about, whenever you're producing a journal, there are certain deadlines that at the end of the day kind of have to be met. So, how do you function as a workplace whenever you're also being respectful of that mentality?
I think that one of the both a challenge, but more than anything else, something I'm very grateful for is that all of the people who are working together, we're all friends. Not all of them actually know each other from before, but I've been a close friend to most of them, or to all of them actually. We have Fiona, who's new, who we're really happy to have on board, who's now a close friend. And I think that when it comes from a place of friendship, I'm sure you guys also feel it from being sisters, that there is an honesty that means that, okay, well, if you can't get this done, you can say it, and then someone else will pick that up, and we can move that forward together. Because there are, as you say, like there's still deadlines that actually have to be met. There's still things that really have to be done. And while we've been really clear about, like, our issues might get delayed because we're independent self-publishing, but other things like newsletters maybe can't, because this is a thing that we've decided we're going to be consistent about, but also, as we say, decided somehow. When it comes from that perspective, it's like, okay, so if you do a little bit of forward planning and speak really openly, and I think that in workplaces, this is what's always difficult. Um, I've have like an anecdote from, I used to work as a chef a while ago, when I was in college, when I was in uni, and my head chef was always telling me, well, in the end of the day, it's just dinner. So if they're going to be upset about it, they'll be upset about it, but it's just dinner. But the dinner is important, Food is the best thing ever.
I love dinner though. I love dinner.
And I think that actually, like, when you say, like, oh, like, if we just slow down, we will get the respect that we deserve. Because I think that people will be like, well, why didn't this exhibition open? I've been planning to go to New York specifically to see this. You can't just not open a show. And the same way,
Watch me.
like,
That's the
But it's
attitude I'd like to bring to the art
that
world.
is such an interesting point. I mean, I think every person who studies art has had that moment where they travel so far to see something and you get there and it's not on view, but the world keeps turning. It sucks when you're there and you're like, I have been waiting for this moment for years, and this stupid piece of art isn't fucking here. Like it's a miserable experience, but it's not one that many people understand the interworkings of what went, behind the scenes to get, all the other surrounding pieces, on view or whatever.
It's
But at
collective,
the end,
but then it
it's like
also brings you down to the singular perspective of the kind of person-centric viewing experience. Like, these cultural destinations are for everyone, and there are a lot of exhibitions that I've even worked in particular, where we have to have trainings about how, like, everyone might not agree with this artist's viewpoint, and you need to be prepared for that.
yeah.
And so those are all things that go into the logistics of public art spaces, right? Well, I mean, and we can go back and we can think about this through the perspective of your journal, Maria. There are so many things that might not have made it into the journal, or maybe are pushed or postponed. Like, we don't see those operations behind the scenes. What we get is just this lovely physical book, or digital copy of a perfectly published journal, and all of the challenges that went behind the scenes. It's just as if we were looking at a painting, and we didn't know that 100 hours went into it, but we just assume, like, oh yeah, this took a lot of work, cool, I'm gonna spend 1 minute looking at it, right? Like,
yeah.
ah. The average someone looks at a piece of artwork, is just like, hurts me, folks.
Which is also so ironic, given the pace at which we know internal museum staffs function when you're on a tour and they're like, practice slow looking. Or I was at a museum this past weekend, and it was like teaching you about meditation and how to like practice mindfulness when this piece of art in front of you, and I was like, does the staff know that this is here? Like, do they know how to use this? Like, I'm concerned for the speed at which it probably took to integrate this thing into a museum, but that ironically is probably not being practiced behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think with all things entertainment, I feel, because we still see art to a large extent as entertainment, kind of as a public, that there is so much pressure of things being exactly right. But lately, I've also been seeing how many times it just goes wrong. It's like at almost every festival, there is a headliner that either gets canceled or cancels. So many shows are just like, they just actually didn't open, or actually this big artist that we're sending were problematic, so all of these things are just not happening. And I'm not trying to say that the problematic artists should still be there. I'm just saying that actually these things shift so much. And you're talking about this deadline brain, Bianca, and I can really feel that as well. But then I kind of, when I took a step back and started to ask myself, where, well, all of these deadlines are just not being met by anyone. And while the museum staff is stressing themselves out about it, the museum to the public just hangs a note saying currently unavailable. And that's the end of it, you know?
Yeah, I think that's actually really funny. I was downtown the other day here in Tulsa, and I went into the Woody Guthrie Museum here in Tulsa, which is an American singer, and I had never been in, and it's like, oh, this is kind of like an important thing. And I thought it was really interesting. The museum docent was telling me, oh, I'm sorry, one of our traveling exhibition spaces, it's just in transition right now. So we're setting up the new space. So you'll just have access to the permanent collection. Great. I think as you also go to museums too, you become a little bit used to that. But I think what you're talking about, Maria, too, is kind of interesting in terms of other forms of entertainment, because there's a lot of kind of critique happening right now, where Bianca and I have talked about this overproduction that I feel like at least I experience with something like Marvel Cinematic Universe. And we keep getting these really shoddy TV productions released on Disney Plus, and I feel like the visual effects are terrible. And I feel like I also have no right to critique that as someone who doesn't know how CGI or visual effects work, but based on the entertainment that I consume, it's just not up to par. And yet we're just producing this content just to produce it. And so in terms of kind of how we bridge the gap here at Artpop Talk between, what's happening with other entertainment, and then also, as you said, viewing art as that entertainment too. These are all kind of spaces or entry points that at least some of the listeners are experiencing, but they might be on different levels or different entry points. So also speaking of deadlines, Maria, I definitely owe you an article by the end of this month. So Art Pop Talk, like you said, is a contributing writer of the journal. And I had the pleasure of interviewing or meeting one of the featured artists that will be from not this issue, but the next one, which will be a physical journal on the theme of memory. And their name is Harriet Gillett. And Harriet's a really interesting artist that, again, explores this idea of memory from kind of this like mix up of kind of post-impressionism like surrealist contemporary art. She's got a lot going on. But Maria, I just like to talk about the kind of writing process that you set up for your network of artists or professionals and your writers, because as you spoke about earlier, coming from that bell hooks perspective, you really like to think of these writings more as a conversation and not just an interview, something that's really digestible. And from my experience in just trying to write this article for this upcoming issue, I think you really lay that foundation and you really try to have the writer and the artist, or the, to use terms interviewer and interviewee, you like to set them up on the same playing field and make those introductions, which I have to say is something that I have not experienced before in writing for other art zines or other arts journal. I have written articles, about artists, and I've never met them, and I don't know if they've read what I've written. So this has just been a very unique experience. And I mean, I just feel like coming as a contributing writer, it's such a privilege that you also are creating these connections. So anyways, I'm a fan, but I want to hear you kind of speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that what you're saying is true, that it's quite rare. I see it more and more coming up, that let's say conversations rather than interviews. But I think that also quite often those things are quite set up. And it's difficult to, I mean, I'm so glad that you found that so nice, and that you actually were able to connect and like really meet and really speak. But I think that it's also something we've really been playing around with a lot, of how do you introduce to people. And we have a lot of people come with questions in terms of, you know, what's your style guide? How exactly do you want me to write this? And people actually want to fall back onto the interview process because it's a little bit simpler, perhaps, um, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself. I mean, I'm all for reading interviews in general, but I think that it's so hard to kind of, even when you're doing an introduction over email, how do you create that space that's a little bit different? One of the things we've kind of been doing is to move people over onto WhatsApp, because you have a WhatsApp group chat and suddenly, people sending emojis and like a little video of, I mean, I'm doing this conversation now between two artists, Dandara Harm and Daniel Hengst, where I'm also involved. And Dandara has just had a baby, so time, and they have like a massive time difference at the same time. So Daniel is in Germany, Dandara is in Brazil, and kind of trying to navigate actually finding a time to meet turned out to be too difficult. So we said, let's do voice notes. And because they're both so lovely, they end up sending, photos of where they are that day and like a little voice note, and it becomes super nice. Let's see how we manage to like actually put this whole thing into writing. But I'm super excited for that because I think we kind of need to break down this really formal barrier. And in the end of the day, for us at Culturala, I get more out, we all get more out of Eugenia knowing Harriet personally, and then that connection can actually take both of you somewhere else. That is almost more important than the article itself.
Oh
Not
my
saying
gosh, I'm
that
gonna
it's
cry. I need to DM Harriet like
Gemma, where are your
ASAP.
voice notes?
Where are my voice notes? I need to express my gratitude towards this woman right now. But gosh, I just like,
That's
how
just so
lovely
incredibly
is
lovely.
that? It's just so
Like,
I can't. And it also, I mean, as you're speaking to, obviously, Harry and I are in extremely different time zones, and kind of like we are today, Maria. It's 6:40 our time.
quarter to 1 a.m.
We're keeping you up late, sister. Yeah, so it is difficult, meeting people halfway across the world. But it's so awesome to know that, if I ever visited the UK, if I ever went here, even just meeting people in a different state, building this network of artists. And we have these little art pen pals all around the world. And I mean, what a lovely sentiment and, way to connect people.
well, as you just said, we are keeping you up very late, and all of us are
Jesus.
very appreciative of this interview conversation. So, with that, before we let you go, Maria, is there anything that you would like to plug? What's coming next for you? You mentioned a little bit about what's coming up for the journal, but give us, the whole spiel where everyone can find you. We'll link everything, of course, but let us hear it.
So you can find me mainly on Instagram, either through Culturala Journal or m.kruglyak. You can find a bunch of my articles coming up on MAAT Extended, the online platform from the Museum of Art, Architecture and Technology here in Lisbon. You also find me doing quite a few events, both in relation to the next issue on digitalization, but we're also experimenting a little bit here with a few friends and artists of how can we actually create a community here in Lisbon. And one of the other exciting things, which is the Steamship Project Space, which is a project space collective basically in London. And it's a house and where artists both live and work. We used to put up festivals there and all these fun things. And now it's been 5 years that it's been around. So in the end of November, there'll be a 5-year show. So if any one of your listeners is in London, they should definitely come down. And otherwise, for me next, I'm basically gone back to working freelance and I'm really happy. So you'll find me writing articles. Hit me up if you want writing or editorial work because I'm available.
OMG, so many fun things to celebrate. That's awesome. Maria, congratulations. We love that journey for you. Fantastic. It has been long overdue. We've needed to have you on the podcast for a while, so we're so grateful that you were here and that the Artpop Tarts finally got to meet you. As Maria said, you can hit her up. We will link all of her information for you all in the show notes of this episode. And with that, everybody, we will talk to you all in 2 Tuesdays. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Artpop Talks executive producers are me, Bianca Martucci-Fink.
And me, Gianna Martucci-Fink.
Music and sounds are by Josh Turner, and photography is by Adrian Turner.
And our graphic designer is Sid Hammond.